Hi, and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be talking about Albanian culture, and this video is starting a series on my channel in which I explore European countries in alphabetical order, taking a look at their culture through books, movies, series, games, music, and other cultural products. I am looking at both recent top lists as well as classics, just trying to find something new to discover. So today I'll be diving into what Albania has to offer, but first, let's briefly discuss Albania as a country. Albania is one of the states in the Balkans, situated above Greece and bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Albania is a relatively small country with less than 3 million people, and due to its size and its turbulent and isolated history, and the fact that the country is still considered a developing country, its cultural scene is relatively limited. That's why it was difficult for me to find both translated literature and other cultural products from Albania, but I ended up reading one book, watching one short film, and listening to an album. Starting from the book, I read The Palace of Dreams by Ismail Kadare. He seems to be the best known Albanian author abroad, or at least his books were the easiest for me to find. The book itself is from 1981 and it was banned right after being published because of its political setting. It's technically set in some fictional version of the Ottoman Empire, but it talks a lot about Albania. The book follows the main character Mark Alem, who starts his new job at an institution that processes dreams. But I really don't want to spoil the book, so I'll rather talk about the themes and the thoughts I had while reading the book. So, first of all, though Mark Alem is the main character, at least from my perspective, the true star of the book is the world. The setting is totalitarian and corrupt, and it's explored in a very beautiful way. The story is also beautifully layered, talking about family, politics, and work. Particularly, I enjoyed the way the beginning of the book discussed early work life or like the starting of career when you get to a new workplace and everything is new and weird and you just kind of have to figure everything out as you go. That was actually really funny. I don't think most of the book is as funny, but the beginning was very enjoyable in that sense. When it comes to family, I found it interesting how in this book family destiny was discussed and similarly the power of family name. I've read multiple classics that discuss those things, like Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, but I feel like this book managed to discuss it in a different way, or at least I really enjoyed how those things were like integrated into the story. Again, I can't go too much into detail without spoiling anything, but that's something I highly enjoyed. And thirdly, I paid attention to how the book talked about Europe. It's not every book that talks about Europe in the first place, and it wasn't central in this book either, but there were multiple mentionings of Europe and the other European countries. Europe in particular was constantly referred to as something other, something external, though Albania is part of Europe, but I think that had like a strong connection to how secluded Albania has felt and how its culture differs from the rest of Europe. Like, as a quote from the book, in the old days, Mark Alem, too, used to be rather thrilled when foreigners came into a place where he was, and used secretly to admire their European dress. But now, strangely, he found even foreigners devoid of mystery. So, Europeans are foreigners, they have this different fashion. Um, just something that I find particularly interesting. But besides talking about Europe as an entity, the book also talked about Albania's historical connections to countries like Turkey and Austria and the rest of the Balkans. Particularly because I like the setting. The totalitarian world is described to such detail and to such level that it really pulls you in. I think the writing was nicely balanced. It was at the same time very easy to read and simple without being plain or boring. And there were moments when the text was poetic or funny, and those really brought more life to the text. And I mean, the book itself is pretty short. It's a bit short of 200 pages. I think it's 190, yes. 190 pages, and I could have easily read 200 pages more. It was so enjoyable to read and felt really mysterious. And in that, it shared similar atmosphere to Kafka's works or George Orwell's 1984. And for something a little newer as a reference point, I think the TV show Severance also has this kind of like mysterious essence to it. I give this book a strong recommendation. For me, it was 5 out of 5, extremely enjoyable to read. It was entertaining, in a way educating. At least I learned a lot more about kind of Albanian past and history, also just because I wanted to look a little bit more into the actual events in Albania and how the book kind of reflects on those. So yeah, a very good read, very nice read, very nice book. Go read it. I recommend it. No, only if you feel like it, but highly recommend it. Next up, we have music. So for this section, I was considering lots of options. I was, for example, considering listening to some music top lists, but instead I decided on listening to one album. And I made that decision because I was thinking that an album is more a piece of art or piece of culture in the same way as a book is or as a movie is. So that's why we're doing an album. The album I ended up listening to is called Sound of Silence. It's from Arilena. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And it came out in 2023. She won X Factor Albania in 2013, and she would have represented Albania in Eurovision 2021 had the competition not been cancelled. The album itself is mainly in Albanian, but there are also songs in English and French. The album consists of love songs, and the style of music is generally pop, but the songs vary from sort of rock to power ballads. But then, to my actual thoughts on the music, I like the singer's strong voice, and I thought that there was something quite nostalgic about the music. It really reminded me of the early 2000s or maybe even the 90s music. Particularly, I think that was because of some of the instruments, like the electric guitar. But I'm not an expert in music in any way, so I can't really comment on any technicalities. But my favorite songs on the album ended up being Fall from the Sky and Keme Mungu. I looked up the translated lyrics for most of the songs, but I have to say that most of them were not very inspired. Most of the lyrics were very basic love song lyrics, so there was not much creativity. And I personally enjoy songs with a bit more depth in that sense. All in all, I don't think I will be listening to this artist more than this. I still think it was interesting to take a look at the album, and I would recommend it to two types of people. First of all, people who really enjoyed like powerful female artists in the early 2000s. For example, Adele. If you like Adele, I think there are some songs on this album that you would probably like as well. And secondly, I would recommend this album to anyone who's going through something emotional like a breakup and who wants to experience all the different emotions with music. Then I think this album could be interesting to try out. But that's all we have for the album. Lastly, we have the short film. To explain a bit, in this section I would generally prefer to discuss something long format, like a movie or a series or perhaps a game, but for Albania that wasn't really a viable option. And I still wanted to discuss the visual culture in some way, so that's how I ended up on a short film that I could watch on YouTube. The short film I watched is called Afterlife AI. It's from 2022 and it was shot and filmed in 48 hours. The film is by this guy whose name I'm afraid of mispronouncing, so you'll find it over here. It is set in the near future. It touches upon topics like AI and poverty, and its main theme is grief. Again, I don't want to fully spoil the film, it's pretty short, but I found it very interesting how it discusses AI. It's something that has been done a lot in media recently. I feel like I've read multiple books, watched multiple TV shows that discuss AI and kind of what it means to be human, and that's definitely what this short film does as well. Particularly, it reminded me of the movie Her from 2013 and Kazuo Ishiguro's book Clara and the Sun, which both kind of discuss like AI and the concept of humanity. So if you liked either of those, then perhaps the short film would be something that's of interest for you as well. Another thing I was very curious about was whether I could find any connecting points between the book that I read and the short film. I know that they come from very different points in time and they are set in very different points in time, but something that I did find in common between them was the society's distrust. In the short film, it's very much about economics. There's clearly an inflation going on, and that actually ties to the most interesting part of the short film for me personally, since I am so interested in Europe. The short film is actually set in a future where Albania is part of the European Union, which is not the case right now. And I was trying to decipher whether Europe is seen as like clearly bad or whether it was neutral in the short film. And I think that, for example, it was hard to tell whether the inflation was because of the European Union or not in the short film. But I do think that overall it was perhaps portrayed as in like negative light. But yeah, either way, I found it very interesting that the EU had like such a big part to play in the short film. For my own thoughts, I think that the film looked really nice, especially considering that it was made in such a short time. And overall, I felt like it was coherent, it was thought provoking, and particularly the theme of AI is timely. It is something that I'm personally interested in. I like to read books, watch movies, watch series that have to do with AI, and particularly any of the like philosophical questions. Particularly the topic of grief. It's interesting to discuss it together with the concept of poverty and what kind of limitations poverty can create. Economically, it was more on the dystopian side, but if the visuals would portray something, I think they were a little bit on not utopian side, but there was also certain kind of richness. Things were like filmed to be very clean and clear and looking nice. So it wasn't dystopian in the sense of like everything being horrible, but it was not everything being perfect. So it was like mildly dystopian. But that's all for today. If you have any recommendations when it comes to Albania or any of the other European countries, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Ciao!